What happens when Hollywood's sweetheart meets daytime television's most unforgiving hot seat? You won't believe what unfolds when Blake Lively sits down with the View hosts for what was supposed to be a lighthearted promotional interview that spiraled into one of the most explosive confrontations in the show's history. The tension was palpable from the moment she walked onto that stage, but nobody could have predicted the verbal warfare that was about to erupt live on national television. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Hollywood glamour collides with hard-hitting journalism in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. The studio lights were blazing as Blake Lively made her entrance onto the View set, her signature blonde waves catching the camera's glare as she settled into the guest chair with what appeared to be forced confidence. She was there to promote her latest film, but the atmosphere felt different from the usual celebrity puff piece interviews the show was known for. The hosts exchanged glances that seemed loaded with unspoken tension, and Whoopi Goldberg's opening remarks carried an edge that immediately set viewers on alert. "Well, Blake, welcome back to The View," Whoopi began, her tone measured but somehow ominous. "We're so glad you could join us today, especially given everything that's been happening in your world lately." The camera caught Blake's slight flinch at those words, her media-trained smile wavering just enough for eagle-eyed viewers to notice the crack in her polished facade. Joy Behar leaned forward with the predatory instinct of a seasoned interrogator who had scented blood in the water. "Before we talk about your movie, Blake, I think our audience deserves to hear your thoughts on the recent controversies surrounding your promotional interviews. There's been quite a bit of chatter about your approach to discussing serious topics, particularly regarding domestic violence themes in your films." The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and Blake's posture immediately stiffened. Her publicist, seated just off camera, could be seen shifting uncomfortably in her chair, clearly recognizing that this interview was veering far from the agreed-upon talking points. Blake's voice carried a defensive edge as she responded, "I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding about my intentions. When I'm promoting a film, I try to keep things light and entertaining for audiences who are looking for an escape from their daily lives." Sunny Hostin jumped in with surgical precision, her legal background evident in the way she constructed her follow-up. "But Blake, when your film deals with domestic violence, don't you think there's a responsibility to engage seriously with those themes? Many survivors and advocates have expressed disappointment with what they see as your dismissive attitude toward the real-world implications of the story you're telling." The studio audience, usually filled with supportive fans and tourists eager for a glimpse of celebrity glamour, fell into an uncomfortable silence. Blake's hands gripped the arms of her chair as she struggled to maintain her composure, but her voice betrayed her growing irritation. "I think it's incredibly unfair to characterize my approach as dismissive. I've been nothing but professional and respectful throughout this entire promotional campaign." Sarah Haynes, typically the voice of diplomatic moderation, attempted to steer the conversation toward calmer waters. "Blake, I think what the ladies are trying to get at is that there's been some public reaction to certain interview moments that fans found jarring. Is there anything you'd like to clarify or address directly?" But Blake was already past the point of diplomatic responses. Her carefully constructed media persona was beginning to crack under the pressure of sustained questioning, and her voice rose noticeably as she fired back. "You know what I find jarring? The fact that I come here expecting to have a normal conversation about my work, and instead I'm being ambushed with loaded questions designed to make me look bad. This isn't journalism, it's a hit job." The accusation of ambush tactics struck a nerve with the seasoned hosts, who had built their careers on asking the tough questions that other entertainment shows avoided. Whoopi's expression darkened as she leaned back in her chair, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had made her a formidable presence in daytime television for decades. "Blake, nobody ambushed you here. These are legitimate questions that come from real concerns raised by your own public statements and behavior during interviews." Ana Navarro, who had been quietly observing the escalating tension, finally spoke up with the blunt honesty that had made her a fan favorite. "Look, Blake, I think what's happening here is that you're not used to being challenged on your positions. In Hollywood, everyone probably tells you what you want to hear, but this is daytime television, and we ask real questions about real issues that affect real people. The comment about Hollywood echo chambers hit Blake like a physical blow, and her facade of professional politeness finally shattered completely. Her voice trembled with barely contained fury as she shot back. Are you seriously suggesting that I live in some kind of bubble? That I don't understand real issues? I've been working in this industry for over a decade, dealing with more pressure and scrutiny than any of you could possibly imagine. The studio atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable to genuinely hostile, with production assistants exchanging worried glances and camera operators adjusting their positions to capture every moment of the unfolding drama. Blake's publicist was now visibly agitated, making subtle hand gestures that were clearly meant to signal for a commercial break. But the hosts were far from finished with their line of questioning. Joy Behar, sensing that Blake was on the defensive and vulnerable, pressed her advantage with the ruthless efficiency of a prosecutor closing in on a guilty verdict. Blake, the pressure of fame doesn't excuse tone-deaf responses to serious social issues. When you're promoting a movie about domestic violence and you're making jokes about flower arrangements and cocktails, that sends a message whether you intended it or not. The reference to specific interview moments that had gone viral for all the wrong reasons clearly struck home, and Blake's response was immediate and volcanic. You have no idea what it's like to be in my position, constantly analyzed and criticized for every single word that comes out of my mouth. I make one comment that gets taken out of context, and suddenly I'm the villain in everyone's story. Sonny, Hostin wasn't backing down, her voice remaining steady and professional even as the temperature in the room continued to rise. Blake, it's not about being the villain. It's about being accountable. When you have a platform as large as yours, your words carry weight, especially when they touch on issues that affect vulnerable communities. The word accountable seemed to trigger something primal in Blake's response system, and her voice cracked with emotion as she fired back with increasing desperation. Accountable to who? To a bunch of keyboard warriors who twist everything I say to fit their predetermined narrative? To talk show hosts who invite me here under false pretenses, just so they can tear me down for ratings. But the hosts of The View had weathered countless celebrity meltdowns over the years, and they weren't about to be intimidated by Blake's increasingly erratic behavior. The tension in the studio was reaching a breaking point, with everyone present, sensing that something explosive was about to happen, but nobody quite prepared for just how dramatic the fallout was going to be. Whoopi Goldberg's voice cut through the charged atmosphere like a knife through butter, her decades of experience dealing with difficult guests evident in her unwavering composure. Blake, let me stop you right there. Nobody invited you here under false pretenses. Your publicist pitched this appearance, we agreed to have you on, and now you're sitting in that chair acting like we're the problem because we're asking you to address legitimate concerns that your own fans have raised. The camera zoomed in on Blake's face, capturing the moment when her carefully constructed mask of celebrity perfection finally began to crack beyond repair. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of rage and panic as she realized that her usual deflection tactics weren't working on this particular battlefield. My fans. You mean the tiny vocal minority of people who have nothing better to do than dissect every syllable I utter? Those aren't my fans. Those are professional outrage merchants looking for their next target. Ana Navarro leaned forward with the intensity of someone who had spent years navigating political combat zones, her voice carrying the weight of moral authority. Blake, dismissing valid criticism as professional outrage is exactly the kind of attitude that got you into this mess in the first place. When women who have survived domestic violence say your flippant promotional approach minimizes their trauma, maybe the problem isn't with them. The mention of domestic violence survivors seemed to hit Blake like a physical slap, and her response was immediate and venomous. Don't you dare lecture me about domestic violence. You have no idea what I've been through personally, what experiences have shaped my perspective on these issues. Just because I don't perform my trauma for public consumption doesn't mean I don't understand pain. The studio fell into stunned silence as Blake's words hung in the air, her implication that she had personal experience with domestic violence creating an uncomfortable shift in the room's energy. But instead of backing down, Joy Behar pressed forward with the relentless pursuit of someone who sensed they were on the verge of breaking through to the truth. Blake, if you do have personal experience with these issues, then doesn't that make your promotional behavior even more problematic? Shouldn't you be more sensitive to how your words might affect other survivors? Blake's hands were visibly shaking. Now, her voice rising to a pitch that bordered on hysteria as she fought to maintain some semblance of control over the rapidly deteriorating situation. You want sensitivity? How about showing some sensitivity to the fact that not everyone processes trauma the same way? How about recognizing that some of us use humor and deflection as coping mechanisms instead of turning our pain into performance? Art for strangers. Sunny Hostin's legal training kicked in as she recognized the defensive pattern of someone who was cornered and lashing out. Blake, nobody's asking you to perform your trauma, but when you're promoting a film that deals with domestic violence, there's a responsibility to engage with the subject matter appropriately. Your coping mechanisms become problematic when they're displayed in a professional context where they can be interpreted as minimizing other people's experiences. The word responsibility seemed to trigger an even more explosive reaction from Blake, who was now clearly beyond the point of rational discourse. Her voice cracked with emotion as she launched into what could only be described as a verbal assault on her hosts. Responsibility? You want to talk about responsibility? What? About your responsibility as journalists to actually research your guests instead of just reading Twitter gossip and treating it like gospel truth. Sarah Haynes, who had been trying to maintain her role as the diplomatic voice of reason, finally abandoned any pretense of neutrality as Blake's attacks became more personal and vicious. Blake, we did our research. We've watched your interviews. We've read the responses from advocacy groups, and we've seen the pattern of behavior that people are concerned about. This isn't about Twitter gossip. This is about your documented public statements. But Blake was far beyond listening to reason or evidence. Her celebrity ego now fully engaged in warfare mode as she prepared to launch her most devastating attack. Yet, documented public statements? You mean carefully edited clips taken out of context and presented in the worst possible light? You mean selective reporting designed to create controversy where none existed before? The accusation of manipulative editing struck at the heart of journalistic integrity, and the host's collective response was swift and fierce. Whoopi's voice carried the full weight of her authority as she delivered what amounted to a verbal knockout punch. Blake, we're showing you unedited footage of your own words. Nobody forced you to make jokes about domestic violence themes. Nobody put those words in your mouth. You said what you said, and now you're mad because people are holding you accountable for it. The phrase holding you accountable seemed to break something fundamental in Blake's psychological defense system, and her response was pure volcanic fury unleashed without any filter or restraint. Accountable? I'm accountable to my family, my friends, and my real fans who actually know who I am as a person. I'm not accountable to a bunch of strangers who have already decided I'm guilty of whatever crime they've invented in their heads. Ana Navarro's response was delivered with the precision of a surgeon making a critical incision. Blake, when you're a public figure promoting a movie about serious social issues, you become accountable to the public whether you like it or not. That's not a crime we invented. That's the reality of celebrity in the modern world. The studio audience, which had been watching this verbal bloodbath unfold in shocked silence, began to murmur among themselves as Blake's behavior became increasingly unhinged. Her voice was now shaking with barely contained rage as she prepared to cross a line that would make her exit from the show not just inevitable, but absolutely necessary. You know what? I'm done with this ambush. I'm done with your fake concern and your manufactured outrage. You invited me here to promote my movie, and instead you've turned this into a public execution designed to boost your ratings at my expense. The accusation of exploiting her for ratings was the final straw for hosts who had built their careers on legitimate journalism and meaningful discourse. Joy Behar's response was swift and merciless. Blake, if you can't handle being asked basic questions about your professional behavior, then maybe you shouldn't be doing promotional interviews at all. This isn't an execution, it's called accountability, and frankly, it's long overdue. But Blake was already rising from her chair, her body language screaming defiance and wounded pride as she prepared to make the dramatic gesture that would define this confrontation for years to come. The cameras captured every moment as she stood there, trembling with rage, her carefully styled appearance now disheveled from the emotional intensity of the confrontation. Her final words before the ultimate explosion were delivered with the venom of someone who had been pushed beyond their breaking point and was ready to burn every bridge in sight. You know what the real problem is here? Blake's voice cut through the studio like a serrated blade, her composure completely shattered as she pointed an accusatory finger at each host in turn. The real problem is that you're all sitting here, pretending to be champions of justice and accountability while you're actually just bullies hiding behind the facade of legitimate journalism. You've turned this show into a kangaroo court where you get to play judge, jury, and executioner for anyone who doesn't conform to your narrow worldview. The studio audience gasped audibly at the severity of Blake's attack, but the hosts remained unmoved by her increasingly desperate attempts to shift blame away from her own actions. Whoopi Goldberg's response was delivered with the calm authority of someone who had faced down much more formidable opponents than a rattled Hollywood actress. Blake, calling us bullies doesn't change the fact that you came here to promote a movie about domestic violence, and you've spent the entire interview avoiding any serious discussion about the subject matter. That's not our fault. That's yours. Blake's laugh was bitter and harsh, the sound of someone who had completely abandoned any pretense of maintaining her public image. Serious discussion? You call this harassment campaign a serious discussion? You've been trying to destroy me from the moment I sat down in this chair, twisting everything I say and ignoring every attempt I make to explain my position. This isn't journalism. This is character assassination disguised as daytime television. Ana Navarro leaned back in her chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully exposed the true nature of their opponent. Blake, nobody's trying to destroy you. We're trying to get you to take responsibility for your own words and actions. The fact that you're interpreting basic accountability as character assassination says more about you than it does about us. The word responsibility triggered what could only be described as a complete psychological meltdown, as Blake's voice rose to a shriek that echoed throughout the studio. Responsibility? You want to talk about responsibility? What about your responsibility to treat your guests with basic human decency? What about your responsibility to actually listen instead of just waiting for your next opportunity to attack? What about your responsibility to acknowledge that I'm a human being with feelings and not just a punching bag for your political agenda? Joy Behar's response was swift and merciless, delivered with the precision of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of verbal combat. Blake, being a human being with feelings doesn't excuse problematic behavior. We've been more than fair with you, giving you multiple opportunities to clarify your position and address the concerns that have been raised. Instead, you've chosen to attack us and play the victim. But Blake was far beyond the point of rational discourse, her celebrity ego now fully engaged in a scorched earth campaign against anyone who dared to challenge her narrative. Playing the victim? I am the victim here. I came here in good faith to promote my work, and you've ambushed me with a coordinated attack designed to humiliate me on national television. This is exactly the kind of toxic behavior that's destroying civil discourse in this country. Sunny Hostin's legal background was evident in her methodical dismantling of Blake's defensive arguments. Blake, you're not a victim of toxic behavior. You're a participant in it. Your refusal to engage seriously with the subject matter of your own film, your dismissive attitude toward legitimate criticism, and your current behavior are all examples of the kind of celebrity privilege that people are tired of seeing. The phrase celebrity privilege seemed to hit Blake like a physical blow, and her response was immediate and volcanic. Celebrity privilege? You think being constantly scrutinized and criticized is a privilege? You think having every word you say dissected and twisted by people who have never met you is a privilege? You think being invited on shows like this just so you can be humiliated for entertainment is a privilege? Sarah Haynes, who had been trying to maintain some semblance of diplomatic neutrality throughout the confrontation, finally abandoned any pretense of politeness as Blake's attacks became more personal and vindictive. Blake, the privilege is having a platform to promote your work and influence millions of people. With that privilege comes responsibility, and you've consistently shown that you're not willing to accept that responsibility. Blake's response was a primal scream of frustration and rage that seemed to come from the very depths of her being. I don't owe you anything. I don't owe your audience anything. I don't owe the internet mob anything. I'm an actress, not a social worker or a politician or a public service announcement. My job is to entertain people, not to educate them or heal their trauma or solve society's problems. The confession that she felt no obligation to her audience or to the serious themes of her work was the final nail in the coffin of any remaining sympathy the hosts might have had for her position. Whoopi's response was delivered with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. Blake, if you don't think you owe your audience anything, then you don't deserve to have an audience. If you don't think you have any responsibility to engage seriously with the work you're promoting, then maybe you shouldn't be promoting it. But Blake was already moving toward the edge of the set, her body language telegraphing her intention to make a dramatic exit before anyone could stop her. Her voice carried across the studio with the force of a final proclamation. You know what? You're absolutely right. I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve to be subjected to this kind of treatment. And your audience doesn't deserve to watch. You destroy people for sport disguised as social justice. Ana Navarro's parting shot was delivered with surgical precision as Blake began to unhook her microphone. Blake, the only person who destroyed anything here today was you. You destroyed your own credibility, your own reputation, and any chance you had of having a meaningful conversation about serious issues. Blake's final words were screamed over her shoulder as she stormed toward the stage exit, her microphone now dangling from her hand like a discarded weapon. Keep telling yourself that. Keep pretending that you're the heroes in this story. But everyone watching knows exactly what you are, a bunch of bitter, vindictive women who get off on tearing down anyone who doesn't kiss your ring. The studio fell into stunned silence as Blake disappeared through the stage door, leaving behind only the echo of her final insult and the shocked faces of the hosts who had just witnessed one of the most spectacular celebrity meltdowns in daytime television history. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of the aftermath as the hosts sat in their chairs, processing what had just occurred. Whoopi Goldberg was the first to break the silence, her voice carrying a mixture of disappointment and resignation. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was Blake Lively, everyone. When we come back, we'll be discussing the importance of accountability in the entertainment industry and why some celebrities just can't handle being asked basic questions about their work. The show cut to commercial break, but the damage had been done. Blake Lively had just delivered one of the most catastrophic television appearances in recent memory, transforming what should have been a routine promotional interview into a masterclass in how not to handle criticism. Her dramatic exit had been captured in its entirety, creating a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. As the studio crew began to reset for the next segment, the hosts exchanged knowing looks that spoke volumes about what they had just witnessed. They had seen celebrities have meltdowns before, but rarely had they seen someone so completely self-destruct on live television. Blake's inability to handle even basic questions about her professional choices had exposed a level of celebrity entitlement that was both shocking and revealing. The confrontation was over, but its impact would be felt long after the cameras stopped rolling. Blake Lively had walked onto the View set as a beloved Hollywood actress promoting her latest film, but she had stormed off as a cautionary tale about the dangers of celebrity privilege and the importance of accountability in the public eye. Her dramatic exit had provided viewers with an unforgettable moment of television history, but it had also marked the end of her carefully constructed public image as America's sweetheart.